When writing creatively and when analyzing other people's writing, you need to be able to not only identify literary devices, but be able to use different literary devices in your writing. So this is just a brief overview and kind of a reminder of what some of the different literary devices are. First one is figurative language, language that uses figures of speech, similes, metaphors, personification, for more of a poetic effect rather than precise actual meaning. And we'll get into the specifics of each one of these as we continue on. But for example, here you can see it's raining cats and dogs. It's figurative language. It's used for more of a poetic effect. It's not actually raining cats and dogs. We know that the exact term for this would be called an idiom. An allusion is another popular technique that is often used. As you can see, you refer to something familiar. There's a lot of biblical allusions in pieces of writing. This particular one shows you, it's the famous Beatles walking across Abbey Road, and then of course the Simpsons are doing the same exact thing. And so it's just making a connection to a historical event, an historical book, person, things like that, to just give you richer meaning or understanding. Alliteration is that repetition of consonant sounds. You see alliteration a lot in poetry, clamoring across cobblestones. It's that C sound, that repetitive C sound in one line. An analogy is a comparison between two things that are similar in some way. If basketball is your religion, March Madness is your church. You're making an analogy or connection to something else in order to give somebody a broader idea or understanding of the things that you're talking about. Assonance is very similar to alliteration, except it's the similarity of two or more vowel sounds. So it's usually can be within the word or it can be at the beginning of the word. And so all the night I lied down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, Annabel Lee. And you can see we have a repetition of the A sound. We have a repetition of the I sound in night, tide, and lied. We have a repetition of the O sound, down and of. Poe does a lot with assonance, alliteration, consonants, things like that. Diction is just simply your word choice. It's your style. It helps you create tone, attitude, things like that. If you read Mark Twain's Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn, it's the diction, it's how the characters speak that gives you a broader vision and idea of really being in the South during that time period. It's the same thing with Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. A hyperbole is just an exaggerated statement or figure of speech, shouldn't be taken literally. People use hyperboles all the time. We always have to wait an eternity for our dad to get ready. I will literally die if you don't stop using hyperboles. You're not going to die. You're not waiting an eternity. It's just a huge exaggeration. That basketball player, he had to have been taller than a sequoia tree. Imagery, you're appealing to the senses. When we talk about showing and not telling, this is really what we're talking about. You want to take the reader there with you. You want to create a mental picture in your reader's mind. You want them to be able to see, hear, smell, taste, or feel the things in your imagination. And so you do that by using vivid words, by using specific nouns and vivid verbs, and really exact language to paint that picture. Irony, of course, there are three different types. There's verbal, dramatic, and situational. It's the underlying meaning of a statement or situation in contrast. Verbal irony is like sarcasm. If somebody falls down the steps, you'd say, oh, you're so graceful. Dramatic irony is when we know something that someone in the book or the play doesn't know. I think of Romeo and Juliet. We all know that Juliet really isn't dead, but Romeo doesn't know that. That's dramatic irony. And of course, situational irony is the exact opposite of what you think. This picture shows situational irony. They're taking an escalator to a fitness center. A fireman's house burns down. If someone died in their living room, it's all situational irony. A juxtaposition is just simply placing two items side by side to create a certain effect, reveal an attitude, or accomplish some other purpose. And so if you kind of take a look at this picture, the juxtaposition of placing those two clocks side by side at different times. Metaphors, that goes back to that figurative language. Comparing two unlike things, the difference between a metaphor and a simile is a metaphor as I'm saying it's something else. I'm not saying it's like something else. And the other key with the metaphor is that it's two unlike things. All the world is a stage, famous Shakespearean line. So he's comparing the world to a theater stage, and he's saying it is a stage. He's not saying it's like one. Onomatopoeia is words that imitate the sound it represents. Meow, bang, crack. The best example I have for this, if you ever watch any of the old Batman cartoons, pow, zap, zoom. The words come up on the screen as they're happening. Onomatopoeia, it sounds exactly like what the word is. If a bee is buzzing through the meadow. If Olaf starts off by singing, bees a buzz, onomatopoeia. And alliteration, because bees a buzz, two bees. Oxymoron, figure of speech, that's a contradictory term. Jumbo shrimp, he's pretty ugly. Act naturally, recent history, and you can think of all sorts of other examples. Parallel structure is just simply you want to try to write in parallel structure. The repetition of identical or nearly identical grammatical units. If I start a phrase or a series of items and I say he's really good at writing, boating, and skiing, notice they all end in ing. I wouldn't say he's really good at writing, to boat, and to ski. And so you see you have to kind of have similar grammatical units. Personification is when you're giving human traits, qualities, feelings, actions to non-living objects. Any fairy tale that you read as a child, any Disney movie, Beauty and the Beast, they are all personified. Three Little Pigs. Emily Dickinson does an excellent job of using personification in her poetry, and it's a very effective technique in poetry. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The entire poem, she's personifying death. She's giving it human qualities. And then another poem of hers, Hope is a Thing with Feathers. So it's giving hope an abstract ideal or quality, human qualities. A refrain, you see that in a lot in poetry. It's just a repeated word or phrase. If you think of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, he keeps repeating nevermore, nevermore. Repetition, the use of a word, phrase, or another unit of language several times in a passage. Same thing. If you go back to the Raven, he keeps repeating the word nevermore throughout. We already talked about sarcasm. It's kind of like verbal irony. Satire is a piece of writing that kind of pokes fun at or ridicules a human vice or weakness, usually something that's currently occurring in society. We won't do a lot with satire in creative writing. It's more of essays and nonfiction pieces. Simile, like a metaphor, is comparing two unlike things, but now we're using like or as. Crazy as a loon, soft as a feather, quiet as a mouse. You're either using the word as, like. That's going to be the difference between a metaphor and a simile. Symbolism, any object, person, or idea that's used in a literary work or film that stands for something bigger. A dove would stand for peace. In Hunger Games, the Mockingjay became a symbol, and it was a symbol that was used throughout. Tone is the characteristic, emotion, or attitude of the author. So you as a writer, that's your attitude toward the subject. Mood is what you create in the writer. And those are just a few examples of literary techniques that you're going to come across within your own creative writing and in analyzing others' writing.